The war in Ukraine has now taken an unexpected turn. The Wagner group, headed by its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, once a close Putin ally, is now fighting against Putin in what has been called an insurrection. Some have even gone as far as calling this a coup. Putin described this as treason, but as soon as this started, it seemed like it has ended. The Wagner group boss, Prigozhin, announced that in order to avoid bloodshed, we are returning our convoys to bases. Well, the obvious question is what led to this mutiny or insurrection in the first place, and why did it end just as quickly? Just a couple of the questions we'll be asking our guests in this edition of The Spotlight. First, let me introduce our guests. All right, gentlemen, welcome. Let me first go to our guests in New York. Taking a look at what has happened, obviously, the natural question is really, why did this start in the first place, as announced by the Wagner chief Prigozhin, and then it ended just as quickly, it appears, in an audio message that he said to avoid bloodshed, we are returning our convoys to bases?
Well, as we can probably determine the beginning, we weren't very clear what's happening. And similarly, I don't think many people can understand what the end is going to be. It seems to be quite opaque, other than the foreign leader putting out a statement. One of the coup leaders then saying that a statement that agrees with that. But we still have thousands of these private mercenaries far away from their deployment, on the road towards Moscow. The fact that we are just now seeing some pictures of cars turning the other way does not mean they're going to go back to the same deployment. They can easily stop by at the military district that they fully now control, Rostov, a city of a million people. So we don't know until people go back to where they were supposed to be at the beginning of the week where this ends.
Okay, that's true. I mean, we still have to wait and see whether this is going to actually happen or not. What would you like to see happen?
Well, right now, it's very obvious that Ukraine would enjoy some ability to liberate the areas of Bakhmut, where the Wagner group had been occupying for just a couple of weeks, but also seeing possibly some of these people be brought to justice in the near term.
All right, let me go to you, Elijah Magnier. And I have to ask you the same question, really, as to why this development took place in the first place and why it appears, at least up to this point, that it has ended based on an hour's worth of time to have elapsed. It appears from the time that the Belarusian president spoke to the Wagner chief, and for now, for this return to happen.
Thank you for having me. I think we need to understand the origin of this rebellion from Yevgeny Prigozhin. It started in 2018, sorry, in Syria, when the Wagner group crossed the Euphrates following ISIS, and there was a lack of coordination between the Russian base in Khmeimim and the Americans. This is why they bombed the Wagner forces that were crossing the Euphrates and killed and wounded between 200 to 300 men. So this is where it has started. And then the situation went on to the battle in Ukraine, when the Wagner forces started to attack Bakhmut to the order of the Russian Defense Ministry. However, we have seen throughout the war that the Russian Defense Ministry has only one spokesperson. Nevertheless, Prigozhin has decided to go on social media and started to give information about what's happening on the battlefield, something that the Russians normally don't do. Providing this information, he made himself very popular on social media, and he started to attack the defense minister and the military command in Russia by not being delivered enough weapons to continue the battle. And he even threatened to withdraw from Bakhmut. So this is something that unheard of, to have two spokespersons, one official, one non-official, and secondly, a commander in the battlefield that is threatening the command back in the Kremlin of withdrawing from the battle. So this is when it started, and then we have understood from all the declaration toward the end of Bakhmut that Wagner was coming to the end of the battle in Ukraine. And Prigozhin himself said, after the Battle of Bakhmut, we will withdraw from the city. In the meantime, the Kremlin was already filling up forms, accepting all those who want to enroll in the army, including those who have a criminal record, something that has never been done in Russia. This is why we understand that Wagner was coming to the end because of the rebel side of their leaders that he showed during the battle. And then when we understood that the Battle of Bakhmut has ended, this is where the role of Prigozhin diminished as a player on the ground in the battlefield. And then he started to understand that in the Kremlin, he was not getting what he wanted as ambition and whatever he was requesting during the Battle of Bakhmut. Now, the world forgot that the front line between Russia and Ukraine is around 950 kilometers, and not only Bakhmut, but because of the social media gave so much importance to Bakhmut, this is where Prigozhin shined. Now, why the forces withdrew? Because Putin is clever. We have several thousand of men from Wagner with a 300 vehicle going toward Moscow. They can be destroyed in less than an hour by the Russian Air Force, but Putin decided to end it without firing one single bullet through negotiation. We understand that Prigozhin is also not a very clever man and not a strategic person, because he went to Rostov not fighting, but staying there in a city that is bigger than Belgium, 5 times the size of Lebanon, and he thought with 20 to 30,000 men, he can occupy it, which is impossible. What he's going to go and do in Moscow without provision, without logistic, with an army that the Russian army is 1 million men, it is really unclear.
Okay, well, you know, there's so many question marks here. And Andrij, if I may ask you, first of all, and this is not something that I'm saying, this is what Western media is saying, in particular U.S. media, about the Ukraine's counteroffensive. This comes at this time, and it was deemed by many accounts not to go as smoothly as Ukraine would like it, and obviously some of Ukraine's staunchest allies like the U.S. I mean, the U.S. media says, quote, Ukraine's counteroffensive is having less success, and Russian forces are showing more competence than Western assessments. And then you have this development happen. Do you think that's kind of odd for this to happen in terms of the timing?
In terms of the pullback from Bakhmut and Wagner, that doesn't really help the Russian forces. In terms of what's happening on the front line, there's quite active assaults happening today. It has been happening since the full-fledged start of this counteroffensive on around the 4th of June. And frankly, the Western sources that most people tend to listen to get their reporting directly from people on the front line. From one side, Ukraine, they have become completely tight-lipped and not really sharing what's happening from their end, and that has allowed those who report from the Russian side, not the reporters, but in terms of the sources from the Russian side, to play up their defense. So I think we still have a while to go to see exactly what's happening with this counteroffensive, and once Ukraine will once again allow local commanders to start talking to the press, we'll get a little better sense of what actually has been happening. But beyond that, we do know that Ukraine has attained more and more territory day by day.
All right. Well, Elijah Magnier, when you take a look at what has occurred, don't you think that this situation is ripe for exploitation when it comes from either NATO, the U.S., the EU, or any of these countries or organizations that are allied with Ukraine to try to take advantage of the Wagner Group and see whether it can make any roadways? I mean, we don't know. Of course, we don't know what's happening behind the scenes. but I think it makes the situation ripe for there to be maybe some kind of outreach. What are the possibilities of that, do you think?
Well, first of all, the Americans no longer use the word of terrorist organization when defining Wagner, but they call them today rebel group. Secondly, the mainstream media are calling them forces that want to fight the corruption in Russia. So immediately there was a kind of more sympathy and harmony with what the Wagner group was doing, with the hope that they can manage to do something. We have seen that few men that attacked the Russian city on the border with Ukraine were praised by the mainstream media and by NATO, portraying them as the forces that are going to liberate Russia. So if we look at the Wagner group with the 20 to 30,000 men willing to go and fight, even if they have no chance to win, but they will, of course, disrupt the military in Moscow and then divert a little bit the attention domestically without changing really what's happening on the front line. That will be extremely well welcomed by by NATO and its allies. So I don't think now is going to change anything, because this has ended. And the next step, I believe, President Putin has never reacted to any event, but he always takes his time. And I believe Wagner will going to be thrown in the battlefield, and with the hope that their leader and their members will fight heroically, but many of them will be killed in the battlefield. And that is the best way to end the tension with this group that was going outside the control of the Kremlin, with the fault that goes back to Russia that allowed Prigozhin to grow so big in the battlefield and on social media without really putting a limit to a group of non-governmental group, but paid by the government.
Okay, Andrij, a simple question here. How do you think Ukraine is reacting to all of this? And what can it do to take advantage of the situation that has unfolded, first the start of it, and now that it has, well, we don't know, based on what you have said, whether it's going to stick to the current development, which is, I guess, what has appeared to be an end, at least up to this point?
Again, Ukraine, this isn't a part of what Ukraine is operating or doing. This is all on the aggressor side. There are plenty of fortifications on the occupied territory of Ukraine where Ukraine couldn't just rush in, even if Wagner had pulled out. Bakhmut would be the exception to that, because that area hadn't been occupied for as long as the other fortified locations. So that would be a logical place for Ukraine to go on further. However, at the same time, it's not as if the war took a pause in Ukraine. There were 51 cruise missiles last night, 41 which were shot down. There was an enormous amount of death in one of the suburbs of Kyiv. So it's not as if the Russian military has taken a pause. They are still actively firing on Ukrainian positions. And so therefore, Ukraine, to its benefit, really didn't launch blindly a counterattack, or was lured into a new direction of counterattack because of the chaos in Moscow, but wisely, let it play out to see if Russians would start turning on each other and shooting at each other.
All right, I'm going to reach out with this question, and I'm wondering if it's a far reach, Elijah Magnier, because it has been cited, this point of view where there may be a possibility that Russia may use this situation as a means in order to see if there is any possibility of ending this war. Do you think that that is a scenario that could play out?
I don't think so, because the Americans told us that this war can last for years. Victoria Nuland, the Undersecretary of State, said it can last 6 years or 16 years. The Americans have no intention to end this war, and it is not up to Russia to decide when to end it, because Russia can't accept to be defeated. And the Ukrainians are ready to offer themselves for the glory of the US, and the Americans are very happy to continue financing a very cheap war. So nothing is going to change in Ukraine unless the Ukrainian army is enough destroyed to no longer be able to mount any attack and regain a defensive line. Today, the Ukrainians are attacking in the counteroffensive. They don't understand that when you attack, you need 5 times the forces of the defender. This time, Russia is on the defense, and this is why the Ukrainians are not really able to make any major advance on the battlefield. But NATO said they continue fighting. In Ramstein, there are 50 nations gathered to offer intelligence information, all the equipment and the money to Ukraine to continue fighting and hurt Russia as much as they can. So I don't see the end of the war any soon.
One thing we're trying to figure out here, Andrij, is the indications of any kind from either side as to whether there is a silver lining in any of this, or even prior to this, of any perhaps breakthrough that might lead to the war ending. One of the things that was not broadcast, I mean, was broadcast, but it wasn't highlighted, was the statement coming from Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO chief, who said that maybe Ukraine should be on a program where NATO countries provided with supplies, including NATO, obviously, with military supplies on an ongoing basis, which can be construed as to the fact that the Ukraine should always be on standby when it comes to Russia. What do you make of that statement? This is in one of the conferences that were held when it was talk about how there can't be a real security guarantee from NATO towards Ukraine.
Well, we're on that path towards NATO membership. We'll have the conference in Vilnius, the summit in Vilnius coming up 2 weeks from Monday, or 2 weeks from Tuesday. We already saw in Madrid last year how it wasn't the standard communique from dating back to 2008 about promising that or re-emphasizing the promise that Ukraine will be a member. But last time we at the last summit, we did hear that Ukraine is not only will be promised that, but they will be achieving a membership action plan in the near future. We also know that at this summit, Ukraine will have a full summit level of having a NATO-Ukraine Council. This is above what it had previously, so no other nations can object to them participating at this council. It will have the full rights of a member to interact with the NATO-Ukraine Council. And basically, we're on the same path we've been since 1991, when Ukraine first signed up for NATO programs. 1994, when the NATO Partnership for Peace